He was losing his grip and also began to panic. She chose to make an emergency landing that she herself was not ready for, and they both crash-landed on a spot above the cove. Hiccup rolled as he landed and found himself face first in the ground. That could have gone better. He took a breath and felt lightheaded from a new smell. The smell was intoxicating for some reason and fogging up his sense, but he quickly shook it off as he got up to his feet. He shook himself to get the pleasant feeling that ran through his body when he heard giggle per asterisk. Hiccup turned around and pushed aside some of the grass they landed in to see Luna rubbing herself all over the patch she made. Luna, are you okay? Giggle I feel fine too Fleth. Everything is fine Luna kept on rubbing all around as she spoke with a slight slur to her speech. Hiccup stood there dumbfounded at how she was acting. He bent down and plucked some of the grass before he sniffed it himself. Instantly he felt euphoric at it and he shook his head to clear it. Wow. That was something. He looked back at Luna and couldn't help but think that she was acting like a cat when given catnip. Must be catnip for dragons, dragon nip. Before he could think anything else he found himself being pulled down. Luna pulled Toothless into her grasp and hugged him to her chest as she continued to roll and rub herself on the now named dragon nip. Thank you for being my friend Toothless. I haven't had this much fun in long time. Hiccup laughed at how she was acting and just patted her stomach. You're welcome. Whoa, he yelped when Luna continued to roll around with him in her grasp. After 30 minutes they got out of the grass and back to the cove, but Luna made sure to remember where that patch of grass was so that she could go roll in it later. Hiccup put some of the grass into his vest so he could maybe use it in dragon training, or just enjoy it himself. Don't do drugs, kids. You feeling better? Luna shook herself a bit before nodding. Yeah. I never thought that I would find that here. It was really nice. Hiccup looked up in the direction of the dragon nip. Do you dragons have a name for it? Luna laid down in order to rest after rolling around for so long while licking her paw to clean her face. No, but I have heard about it before. I just never thought that I would get a chance to roll in it. Hiccup smiled before he noticed that the sky was getting dark. He sighed as he got up and looked to Luna. Well, I gotta go, Luna. I'll be back tomorrow. Luna jumped on Hiccup to lay her head on his chest. She looked down at him with a cheeky smile. Hiccup would have tried to push her off, but he knew that it would be pointless. He thought about why she would do this until he remembered, I'll get you your favorite fish if you let me go. Once he finished saying this, he was instantly freed. He got back to his feet as he brushed off his clothes. You greedy reptile. Luna just stuck her tongue out at Toothless. I get my favorite fish, so I don't care. Hiccup smiled as he walked up to Luna and brought his hand up to her. Luna looked at the hand in a bit of confusion. He just had his hand up in front of her face. He had never done this before, so it took her a second before she realized what he wanted. She closed her eyes as if she was doing the dragon's calm and pressed her snout in his hand. Hiccup smiled at this. He didn't really know why he did this, but he just felt that it was something that he needed to do. Thank you for being my friend. Luna smiled as she kept her eyes closed and snout pressed in his hand. And thank you for being mine. Underscore 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 underscore. End of chapter. Chapter 9, Voice in the Raid. Dragons. Hiccup was startled awake from the shout as well as the loud horn that signaled a raid. He bolted out of his house, thankful that there were no dragons burning his house down. It had been a few days since he had last seen Luna, and dragon training was just going through the Gronkle again. Hiccup didn't know why Luna hadn't been at the cove, and he missed her already. As Hiccup was running through the attacking dragons and fighting Vikings, he kept hearing the voices from both sides, but they were so mixed up that he couldn't distinguish what they were saying or who was saying it. Once he made it to the forge, he was surprised to see who else beside Gobber stood inside. Astrid. Astrid turned around to see that Hiccup had arrived, but before she could say anything, Gobber beat her to it. Glad you could make it. Now don't just stand there. We got orders to fill. He turned to Astrid before giving orders. Stoke that fire and get it heated. He pointed to the furnace to show that the fire inside was dying out. Astrid did as ordered and got some coal into it before she began to use the bellows to get it heated. Hiccup got out of his confusion and moved over to the pile of already bent swords and axes before picking them up and setting them in the fire so they could heat up. Once that was done, he went to get his apron and gloves, put them on, and got to work on making a few bowlers for pickup. This was the second time that Astrid was helping out in the forge and she felt that it would be easier for her. She actually didn't expect Hiccup to show up since she hadn't seen him at all other than in dragon training. While she stoked the fire she kept glancing over to the boy and couldn't help but notice a few things. He knew what he was doing. He was at the moment making bowlers for the Vikings to use, but the fact that he was making them so quickly was astounding. He had already made 6 of them in 5 minutes and he kept going. She would have assumed that he was making them poorly in order to make as many as he can, but she saw a Viking take one of them and toss it at an adder, that then became unable to fly and was sent back to the ground. Not only was he making them fast but they were sturdy as well. She witnessed Hiccup finish another few of them before getting up and moving to the heated weapons, picking up a heated sword carefully, setting it on an anvil, and using a hammer to straighten for further use. Something else she noticed was that both Hiccup and Gobber worked really well together. So much so that they didn't even say anything if they needed something from the other. An example of this is when Hiccup, who was still straightening out a sword, put the hammer down, grabbed a pair of metal tongs, stretched them out, and Gobber grabbing them as he moved to another side of the forge. These two worked in sync with each other so much so that she wasn't sure exactly what she could contribute. This thought was removed from her head when Gobber spoke up. Astrid, get some of those ingots and place them over there for smelting. After THA heat them up and make sure they get into the proper mold. We need about 5 more swords today. Astrid complied with the order and moved to get them done. I guess I can help them. As she was doing this task she noticed that Hiccup suddenly seemed distracted by something since he was shaking his head every few minutes. Hiccup didn't know what was wrong with him at the moment. Everything seemed so noisy to him, like his mind had 1,000 voices in his head. At first, he thought it was just the fighting outside of the forge, but there was this one voice that kept speaking. It was the same voice and it seemed to be saying the same thing, but he couldn't make out what it was saying. Ut, LLTH, why me, RN, ed. Ut, LLTH, why me, RN, ed. The voice kept repeating and it was starting to get to Hiccup. Not only was the voice repeating in his head, something about it compelling him to do something. Stop it. I gotta get these wraps fixed. Ut, LLTH, why me, RN, ed. The voice kept going but Hiccup chose to ignore it. Ut, LLTH, why me, RN, ed. Stop. Ut, LLTH, why me, RN, ed. Enough. Ut, LLTH, why me, RN, ed. Be quiet. Ut, LLTH, why me, RN, ed. Shut up. Ut, LLTH, why me, RN, ed. 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 Stop it, stop it. Underscore 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 tilde Luna tilde. Luna finished blasting the 3rd catapult and was circling around to get another one. She had noticed that Toothless wasn't with them in this raid, so she assumed that he was still here in the village. I hope he is still okay. She had begun to circle around the village at a much lower altitude than usual. She knew this was risky, but she was looking for Toothless among the chaos that was going on in the village. She kept searching for him well into the raid, but she couldn't see any sign of the skinny Viking. I hope he's okay and that no dragon had. Stop it. Underscore 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 tilde Hiccup tilde. Hiccup kept hearing the voice in his head. Its consistent repeating was starting to get to him. Not only that, the compelling feeling he had every time he heard the voice was beginning to drive him crazy. It had gotten to the point that he could no longer take it anymore. Stop it! Asterisk roar, asterisk. As if the world listened to him, the dragons all stopped their actions and stood in place. This had caught the attention of the Vikings as well. They did not hear the voice, but they did hear the roar. No one knew where it came from, but what they all assumed was that a new dragon had arrived and caused all the other dragons to stop in fear. Much to the shock of the Vikings, most of the dragons began leaving, without any of their catch, and began to fly away in a different direction than they usually came and left in. Luna had landed on a house that was obscured by smoke as her gaze fell upon the forge. She knew that roar and she couldn't believe what it had done. Toothless. She whispered out breathlessly. She then noticed some of the Vikings begin to attack again and took this cue to get back in the air. Once she was back in the clouds, she looked down to see that some of the dragons had gone back to raiding the village, but the rest had left to who knows where. She shook her head at this. This raid would get the queen no satisfaction. She knew that the number of dragons lost in this raid would mean nothing to the queen other than a few more dragons being eaten to satisfy her hunger. But this brought up something for her to think about. The dragons had heard that roar and stopped what they were doing. Underscore 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 tilde in the forge tilde. Gobber was leaning outside of the forge to see that the raid was coming to an end. He wasn't sure what had happened really, but he was thankful that it ended so quickly. Astrid was looking out to the rest of the village as she saw many of the Vikings had begun wrapping things up. She, like the rest of the people nearby, had heard the roar, but no one knew where it had come from. One thing did cross her mind though. It happened the same time Hiccup shouted. Hiccup was panting slightly as he relaxed at the silence. He could no longer hear the voice that was repeating in his head, so he assumed that it was a dragon that was attacking the village. For some reason, he was exhausted and he didn't know why. He could only assume that it was from that weird voice that kept repeating in his head, compelling him to do something. He didn't know how much longer he could have dealt with it since it was driving him crazy. Taking a deep breath to calm himself down, he walked out of the forge to survey the damage. As he was looking around, he saw the other teens walking towards the forge. Fishlegs looked excited about something while the others were looking around for something. Fishlegs spoke up the second he was close enough. Did you hear that roar, Hiccup? I have never heard a dragon sound like that before. It could be a new species. Tough Nut gained a look of mischievousness. I wonder how much damage it can do. Do you think it could make a bigger explosion than the Ziplyback? Snotlout merely crossed his arms. Well, if it is a new kind of dragon, I'm going to chop off its head and mount it on the wall, or I could give it to Astrid as a wedding gift. Then you're never going to give it since there won't be any wedding. The group looked towards the forge to see Astrid walking out while taking off the apron she was wearing. Hey babe. Astrid growled and merely slapped him. I would punch you, but I'm still slightly tired from working in the forge. This shocked the rest of the teens other than Hiccup. Rough Nut asked in confusion. Wait, you are working in the forge? Tough Nut finished her question with Hiccup. Astrid glowered at the twins. I didn't expect him to be there. This caught Hiccup by surprise. What do you mean? I work there almost every day. Yeah, except for the last raid. You weren't even in the village at that time. Fishlegs gained a look of contemplation. Actually, that's right. No, saw you around that time. Where were you then? Hiccup thought about the last time there was a raid and for the life of him, he couldn't remember. Actually, where was I? Was I with Luna? Shaking his head slightly, he looked to the group. I was with a friend that I made some time ago. Snotlout asked, you have friends? Hiccup gave Snotlout a look that said really. Astrid was about to say something, but in moving her arms she felt her muscles react and began to massage them. Rough Nut asked in confusion, what happened to you? Working in the forge is a lot different from throwing an axe. My arms feel a bit numb after a bit of working in there. Fishlegs was the next to speak. Wait, if you are sore from it, how come Hiccup looks fine? Hiccup gestured to the apron and gloves he still had on. I work in there almost every day. I'm used to the work, so it doesn't bother me. Hiccup. Get back in air. We got orders, tar fill and repairs tar make. Hiccup sighed, and with that, I gotta get back to it. Hiccup began running back into the forge. See ya guys in training. Once Astrid heard this, she remembered that she wanted to ask him what he did during the last dragon training. Underscore 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 tilde cove tilde. Luna was pacing back and forth waiting for Hiccup to show up. She wanted to take him away again, but she was also trying to think of a reason to do it. She spent the rest of the day trying to think of something, but she kept coming up with nothing. She noticed that the sun was coming up. She just ate so many moon races until she will want to feed again. A thought came to her mind suddenly: what if she takes control of Toothless again before he comes? This caused her to pace even more before her nocturnal nature began to make her sleepy. She decided to sleep for a bit, and if Toothless arrived she would talk to him then. Underscore 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 underscore. End of chapter. Chapter 9, Burning. Six Eyes roamed its owner's surroundings. What happened? Why have so many not returned? Commanding one of the dragons to approach the ledge that led to the fire pit, she forced the Gronkle to retell what had happened during the raid. The second the Gronkle had finished, she burst from the fire pit and chomped on the Gronkle, taking the ledge it was stood at. She was furious. I will not allow another to take my claim. The queen ended this with a roar that sent the remaining dragons to fly upward through the volcano spout. This was a mistake, as massive flames burst up through the spout, incinerating many of her dragon servants. I will consume you. I will not allow an alpha to take what's mine. Underscore 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 tilde Burke tilde. The following day after the raid started out like any other day when a raid happened. Repairing buildings, fences, and anything that was burnt. Hiccup was working in the forge as he made some bolts, nails, and braces for structural support. And like usual he had help, but unlike usual it wasn't Gobber. Since her house had remained relatively unharmed apart from a few knocked over items, Astrid felt that she could be of help in the forge. She was still learning, so she spent the first hour listening to Hiccup explain how to make these small items before she began to form them before handing them to Hiccup so he could do the final touches, such as hammering out some imperfections and straightening them. Hiccup didn't mind her helping out in the forge since it was lighting his load to a good degree, but for some reason, after the raid was over, he had some sort of pressure bugging him in the back of his mind. He chose to ignore it when it just started, but ever since morning came, it grew to a mild headache and it was starting to get on his nerves, but he did his best to make sure that it didn't show. Astrid was learning that there was more to a blacksmith than just making weapons. Sure, she knew that they made a lot of things that are used around the village, but she was now part of the process. As she finished another few nails, she felt that this was a good time to ask, "Hey, Hiccup." Hiccup paused his hammering to look at her. "What's up?" Astrid moved away from the coals and leaned against the wall. "I wanted to ask you before, but I didn't get the chance. How exactly are you beating the dragons during training?" Hiccup froze up at this, as he didn't think that she would ask him when they were alone in the forge. Oh, Thor. Oh, Thor. What do I say? What can I tell her so she won't become suspicious of me? Hiccup began to shift on his feet as he looked anywhere but at her and rubbed his left arm with his hand. Astrid could tell immediately how nervous he was based on his body language. "What could be so hard about telling me?" She narrowed her eyes, now giving him an accusatory look. She was about to question him more and forcefully get the answer, but someone else chose to interrupt. "Well, if it isn't the disgrace of the village." Hiccup felt his mood worsen even more as he heard the voice of someone he really didn't want to deal with now, or ever. "What do you want, Mildew?" Mildew walked up to the window and smiled at the boy. "Just here to make sure that you aren't trying to sabotage our weapons." Hiccup huffed in annoyance as he turned around and began to work on whatever he was working on. "Why don't you go bug someone else, Mildew? You're not wanted here." Mildew sneered at the boy but was undeterred. Can't leave you on your own, otherwise you would burn down the forge, allowing the dragons to kill us all in the next raid. Astrid, although was suspicious of Hiccup from his earlier behavior, she grew confused about the relationship between the two. Mildew, why do you keep saying these things about Hiccup? Mildew, having just realized that Astrid was there, smiled as if he was proud of her. Astrid. Keeping him in line, I see. Wise decision. Can't leave the misuse of space alone, otherwise, he might open the gates of hell for its spawns to kill us all. Astrid was about to defend Hiccup from the man's words, but she didn't get the chance as she was stunned to see a hammer fly through the air and straight at Mildew's head. Mildew ducked in time to avoid the hammer but was still surprised to see that it was thrown. Hiccup in anger threw the hammer on reflex towards Mildew. Why don't you leave me alone, Mildew? His head was pulsing now and his headache was getting worse. Mildew scoffed as he sneered at the boy before walking off. Hiccup was breathing heavily as he felt warm. This usually didn't bother him since the forge itself was usually warm, but it almost felt like he just got a fever, but it wasn't warm enough for it to warrant his attention. He took a deep breath before turning back to his task and grabbed another hammer. Astrid looked towards Hiccup and could tell that he was breathing slightly heavier. Hiccup, are you? Please Astrid, don't ask. Astrid chose to let it go and get back to what she was doing before, but she kept glancing at the boy and could tell something was wrong. Underscore 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 underscore. Throughout the rest of the day, Hiccup had been feeling lousy. Not really from his outburst, but his body felt strained. It was like he went on a marathon but never stopped. Not only that, but the warmth he felt didn't drop even when he left the forge. Now he was sitting in the great hall, picking at the fried fish he had on his plate. For some reason, he didn't really enjoy it as much as he used to. He remembered the taste of the raw fish he had with Luna and a part of him wanted to taste it again. It was at this thought that the small headache he had pulsed, causing him to rub his temples trying to stave it off. What's wrong with me? Unbeknownst to Hiccup, Astrid was keeping an eye on Hiccup as she remembered how suspicious he acted earlier at the forge. I'm telling you guys that he is hiding something. Rough Nut rolled her eyes. Come on, Astrid. Aren't you just imagining things? Or are you just jealous that he started getting better at dragon training than you? Astrid glared at the other female blonde at that last comment. Okay, maybe she felt a little jealous that the Hiccup was getting better at dragon training fast, and that itself was something to be suspicious for, but that wasn't the reason for her suspicion. Not the whole reason. I'm serious. He is hiding something from us and we need to find out what. Fishlegs took a bite of his chicken leg before he responded, he doesn't really need to tell us anything, you know. He honestly hated to say this next part as he kinda knew about their treatment of Hiccup before. We aren't really his friends. Astrid glared at Fishlegs as she was about to shout at him. She stopped herself as she thought about what she was about to say, I am. But in her mind, she corrected it. I was. She thought back to when she was a kid. Hiccup and she had been friends when they were much younger. In fact, they used to be best friends. But as time passed, she began to become part of the group that saw Hiccup as a nuisance to the village. She distanced herself from him and ignored him when the other kids began making fun of him for his weird ideas. She remembered the day when it really solidified the death of their friendship. Snotlout and Tough Nut had taken to push Hiccup around for their own amusement. Hiccup had wanted someone to help, but there wasn't anyone around, but he had seen Astrid walk around the corner and spotted it happening. The look on his face told her that he expected her to help him out like she used to, but as she took a step back, that look of small relief turned to sadness. She turned the other way and walked away from the scene, not seeing the look of hurt he had. Astrid huffed in frustration as Snotlout spoke with his mouth full. Come on. So he got good at dragon training. That's a good thing. Now he isn't Hiccup the useless. Astrid couldn't drop the feeling of suspicion she had about Hiccup. It kept nagging at her until she had enough and stood up from her seat. Rough Nut saw this and asked, where are you going? Astrid chose to ignore the question and stormed over to Hiccup's table. Oh, this should be good, spoke one of the twins. Hiccup was rubbing his head trying to calm his headache, and so far it was. Where in Thor's name did this headache come from? He was suddenly aware of someone standing on the other side of the table. Looking up, he saw Astrid standing there looking at him critically. What is it? Astrid wanted to demand what caused his suspicious behavior, but she wasn't sure if she should. Their time in the forge kind of told her where their relationship stood, non-existent. She could tell that he was grateful for the help in making the small bits of needed metal, but throughout the whole time, they didn't speak to each other, and the only time they did talk, she was the one to start the conversation. It would seem kind of rude, especially since she just walked up to him out of the blue, but her curiosity won out over logic. What were you so nervous about back in the forge? She said it with a bit more force than she originally wanted, but she couldn't take it back now. Hiccup was taken aback by Astrid's question, but he quickly shook it off as he wasn't in the mood to talk about it. Not that he would tell her really. The reason he was getting better in dragon training was that he wasn't trying to beat the dragons like the other teens. He was playing with them really. It was nothing. Astrid didn't accept that answer. It wasn't nothing. I saw how nervous you got when I asked you. It looked like you were hiding something important. So what was it? Hiccup felt his headache pulse as she continued to raise her voice. Look, what does it matter? 'Cause no one gets as good as you, especially you. Hiccup felt his body heat up as he grew frustrated at this. Why do you even care? You've ignored my existence all this time, and now that I'm actually doing something that will get everyone to actually like me, you come here and start accusing me of something. Hiccup got up from his seat and chose to just leave me alone, Astrid. You've done it for years, so just go back to it. He walked past the crowd that gathered around them and left the great hall, leaving everyone there stunned that he just did that. Astrid was shocked silent as she watched Hiccup leave. Not once had she been yelled at by anyone. Not even her parents, but here was Hiccup leaving after doing just that. She felt angry at the boy, and despite her better judgment she felt even more compelled to find out what he was hiding. Underscore 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 tilde. The next day tilde. Hiccup couldn't focus on anything throughout the day. His head had been pounding ever since he woke up. Not only that, but every time he moved, his body would twitch in pain along with an intense burning that he could feel grow hotter. It was so bad that he didn't even remember what the day's dragon training was, and he had only just left it. Did we face the Gronkle, or the Nada? Oh gods, my body is on fire. He went to his house and immediately grabbed a bucket of water and dumped it on him, clothes and all. Why am I so hot? The cold water had helped him, but it still wasn't enough. It was then that he felt compelled to head to the cove. He held himself up by the wall as he breathed hard. Luna. He left his house not noticing that the water that he dumped on himself was already evaporating. Hiccup made his way through the village and gave half-hearted waves to people that said hi to him, but he couldn't even remember if he even said anything. He just continued to make his way towards the forest. Unbeknownst to Hiccup, the other teens saw him stumble his way out of his house and began to follow him from behind. Fishlegs was the most apprehensive of the group to do this. We really shouldn't be doing this. Tough Nut rolled his eyes as he looked to the larger boy. Come on. Don't you wanna know what Hiccup is up to? Well, I am curious, but this seems a little extreme. Snotlout crossed his arms as he just gestured towards the direction Hiccup went. We just want to know what he is doing. What's the harm? Astrid kept her eyes on the boy that was making his way through the forest while ignoring what the other teens were talking about. It was when they all moved to hide behind a large rock that Rough Nut came up next to her. Still say you're not jealous of Hiccup being better than you in dragon training? Astrid punched her in the arm. I am not jealous. They continued to follow Hiccup for a while until Fishlegs noticed something about him. Guys, don't you think that Hiccup is walking kind of funny? The group looked ahead, and despite how Hiccup was a good distance from them, they could tell that his walking was unsteady. Not only that, they just noticed that he was moving really slow, slower than normal. Astrid quirked an eyebrow. Maybe he is trying to throw us off. Fishlegs on the other hand shuffled on his feet as he didn't agree with that statement. I don't know, guys. He looks kind of sick. The group then watched Hiccup stumbling through the forest, and they now realized that the way he was walking seemed like he was trying his hardest to stand up straight. After this realization, Astrid felt kind of bad for being suspicious about him. It might be that his behavior was coming from an oncoming sickness. This was a red flag for her, as she knew that sickness can be just as deadly as any attack from a dragon. She paused her movements and stood there feeling low for what she was doing to what used to be a friend. She sighed as she decided that they needed to at least help him back to the village to see Gothai. But when she lifted her head, she went wide-eyed at the fact that she lost sight of him. She looked to the others to see that they were looking at her since she had stopped walking. "Did you see where he went?" The group turned back to the direction that they saw Hiccup walking, but they saw that he wasn't there anymore, with Snotlout saying oops. Astrid shook her head. "Come on. If he is sick, then we have to get him back to the village." The group began to run through the forest in order to find the heir to the village. Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup could barely keep on his feet. His body felt like it was burning and he could barely see where he was going. He hoped that he was at least going in the right direction as he trudged forward. After a few minutes of this, he came upon the entrance that led to the cove. His mind was foggy and it was only getting worse. He slowly walked through the entrance, but as he entered the cove, he lost his footing and fell down the high ledge. Underscore 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 underscore. Tilde. A few minutes earlier. Tilde. Luna huffed as she was starting to get bored about being in the cove to just wait for Toothless. She may still be worried about him since during the raid she heard him roar when he was still human. Something got to him and she had a bad feeling about what it could be. "Where are you, Toothless?" It was then that her ears perked up as she heard movement from the entrance. She got to her paws and ran over closer to the cove entrance. But when she saw him popped out of the entrance, she immediately knew something was wrong. "Toothless." Hiccup then lost his balance and fell from the height. "Toothless." She ran to catch him and was fortunate to be able to get underneath him before he hit the ground. She grunted as he landed, but she was more worried about what could have happened. She turned her head to look at him and could see he was breathing heavily. "Toothless, what's wrong?" Hiccup turned his head as he tried to breathe, but the heat coming from his body was making it difficult. "Luna." Luna didn't know what to do, but as she took a breath she caught his scent and it smelled more of a dragon. Is he about to change? But why? Whatever it was that was causing him to be like this, she knew that it wasn't safe if he turned into a dragon here since it was so close to the nest. "Hiccup, I'm going to fly, so please hang on as tightly as you can." Hiccup could barely hear anything, but he was able to hear her, so he weakly nodded as he wrapped his arms as tightly as he could around her neck. "Okay." Luna could feel the heat coming off him, but she needed to get him out of here if he was about to change, so, spreading her wings, she jumped into the sky and away from Burke. Underscore 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 underscore. The teens were getting frantic in their search for Hiccup, cause if he was sick he could very well die from it if they didn't get him to Gothai. It was then that they heard a dragon roar nearby. They each grabbed their weapons and walked as slowly as they could towards the sound. They needed to make sure that Hiccup wasn't being attacked by a dragon. In his state they didn't believe that he would be able to defend himself, especially since they didn't know what dragon it was that just roared. They all moved closer to where they heard it and saw just ahead of them was a drop, and they didn't know what might be inside. As they inched closer they heard someone whisper so softly that it was barely audible. "Okay." They recognized the voice to be Hiccup's and they began to move faster to the edge, but as they got to it, something large and white flew just inches from their faces that they all fell backward and saw what looked to be a white dragon flying away. Every teen was stunned at what had just happened, but as Astrid was looking in the sky at the dragon, she couldn't help but think that she saw something on its back. What? It was then that they all remembered that they just heard Hiccup come from the direction of where the dragon came from. They all got to the edge and looked into the cove for any sign of Hiccup, but no matter how much they looked they couldn't see anything. The teens began to panic at the implication that the dragon had killed Hiccup, but Astrid noticed something about the cove. There was no blood. No signs of a fight. It was then that she remembered that she had seen something on the dragon's back, and she looked back in the direction of the dragon. Did the dragon just take Hiccup? But why on its back? Underscore 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 underscore. End of chapter. Chapter 10, Just Feel Free. Astrid was running. She ducked under, jumped over, and dodged around branches, logs, and trees. She didn't know if the rest of the teens were with her since she hadn't even looked back to see if they were following her, but she could only assume that they were, since they were just as panicked as she was when they heard the roar coming from above them when they tacked Hiccup down. She had to get to the village. She had to warn someone. They had to go and rescue Hiccup. If anyone can survive being around a dragon, it's him. She burst through the trees and into the village as she looked for one of the warriors of the village, and with how few of them there were, she couldn't see any. It was then she saw Gobber singing in the forge and made her way to him. Gobber was hammering a sword for an order he had received not that long ago. Sure, the order was going slower than usual since Hiccup wasn't here, but he was used to it by now. Gobber. Gobber turned around to see the teens stopping by the order window and panting as if they had a dragon on their heels. What the devil's got you kids so tuckered out? Astrid had her hands on her knees as she tried to regain her breath. Now that she had stopped, she looked behind her to see the rest of the group were with her, and they all looked like they had run just as fast as she did. And with her running faster than ever before, she figured they would be just as tired. The twins were sitting back to back as they tried to catch their breath. Fishlegs was laying on his back gasping for air. Snotlout was face first in the ground. Astrid chose to ignore them and turned back to Gobber and speak through pants. Gobber, asterisk pant asterisk, Hiccup, gone. Gobber nodded. That he is. But as always, he will show up when you least expect it. He turned around to get back to work, but still listening to the kids. Astrid took one big gulp of fresh air as she called out Hiccup was taken by a dragon. Gobber's hand froze mid-swing as he heard what the teen said. He spun around and looked hard into Astrid's eyes. It was when he saw the panicked look she had that he lowered his hammer hand. All right, lass. What are you on about? Astrid now stood up straight as she began. Earlier today, we followed Hiccup into the forest. And why were ye following him? The lad usually does this when he wants to be alone. Gobber, just listen. Gobber was surprised since he hadn't been yelled at like this. But seeing the desperation the kids had, he chose to ignore it. The other teens were now standing by Astrid as they began to explain one by one. Snotlout started his frantic explanation. We followed Hiccup cause we wanted to know what he does during his free time away from the village. The twins followed up from here as they switched from Rough Nut to Tough Nut and vice versa. He ran through the forest, jumping around like a terrible terror. But without the fire breathing, or the biting, or the havoc. The other teens chose to ignore them since this was expected at this point. Fishlegs was pulling at his hair as he spoke in a semi-shout. We lost sight of him deep in the forest and thought we would have to come back to the village. But we heard him talking about something and followed the voice, and as we got closer we recognized the voice belonging to Hiccup. As we got closer, Astrid picked up from here as Fishlegs looked like he was about to run out of breath from lack of breathing. We followed the voice and came up on the edge of a cove. As we looked down inside the cove to see if we could find Hiccup, a dragon flew up just inches from us. We were so shocked that we weren't able to ready ourselves. But when we followed it with our eyes, I swear on Odin's beard I saw Hiccup on its back. Gobber then brought up his hands. Now hold ye horses. You saying you saw Hiccup on the back of a dragon? Not being eaten or something? He scratched his head as it didn't sound like usual dragon behavior, and with how Hiccup has been doing in dragon training, it didn't make sense. Yes. Gobber took a step back before he processed everything that he was told. Are you sure about this, lass? Hiccup not being here is normal, but after we saw him do so well in dragon training, I find it hard to believe he would be on the back of, what kind of dragon was it? This caused all the teens to pause as they tried to think of what kind of dragon it was. Even Fishlegs was stumped as he had no clue what dragon it was, and he had looked through the dragon manual so many times that he could recite the whole thing by heart. I think it was a new dragon. I don't remember seeing anything like it inside the dragon manual. This caused Gobber to feel more concerned. He remembered stories about when a new dragon was discovered by one of their Vikings. It was never good because they don't know anything about its abilities, and many Vikings would die to gain information on it. Do you know where it went? Is it possible that it is still on the island? Astrid thought about it and was unsure about it. I don't know. Gobber took that as a yes and moved to grab his axe hand and moved out of the forge and began to make his way around the village to gather volunteers for a search party. He felt the kids were following him, but he felt that he would need as many eyes on this. Hope that lad's training keeps him alive long enough for us to find him. Underscore 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 tilde elsewhere tilde. Luna was pushing her wings as hard as she could to get as far away from the nest as she could, as fast as she could. She could still feel the queen's pull in the back of her mind, and if she could feel it, she knew that the second Toothless turned, he would become a puppet for her again. Hang on a little more, Toothless. Just a little more. She didn't hear a response, and she turned her head to see that Hiccup was grimacing from his slow transformation. Unbeknownst to Luna, Hiccup had not heard Luna say anything. His body was screaming in pain as his bones were increasing in size and reshaping into his draconic form. He would have been screaming in agony if not for the fact that his mind was at the moment being assaulted. Obey me. Who are you? Feed me. What do you want? Follow your queen. It was then his screams rang loud. Luna almost faltered as the scream was so close to her ears. She continued to push her already impressive speed to the limit. Oh no, she could feel Toothless getting heavier as the seconds passed. Not yet, Toothless. Hiccup continued to scream as the snapping of his bones were heard as his transformation began. He tightened his grip around Luna's neck as his fingers began to become claws. Luna winced as his grip began to hurt. They haven't punctured her scales or hide yet, but she could feel the fingers slowly becoming sharper. She began to panic as this was a very bad time for him to transform, since it could cause either one or both of them to fall out of the sky. The main problem was that she could still feel the queen's influence, despite how it was fading fast. The second more concerning issue was that they were over the sea. If either of them falls, they could find themselves drowning by either exhaustion or by being attacked by a water spitter, Scaldron. She looked ahead and saw she was closing in on a land mass. She had to flap harder since Hiccup was now weighing her down. She turned her head to see that Toothless was almost fully turned, with the only thing left being his wings. At that moment, his wings sprouted out wide. This had caused his wings to catch the wind and he was flung off of Luna's back. Luna shrieked in panic as she spun around as sharply as she could and flew after Toothless. She was tired, she was sore, she didn't care. The whistling of the Light Fury's dive could be heard as she dove for Toothless, and she was fortunate enough to latch onto him. Unfortunately, thanks to the speed they were going, they both fell into the sea hard. Luna felt her consciousness wane as the crash into the water had been painful. The panic she felt due to her kind not being adept swimmers was not helping either. Sure, they could swim, but they would be unable to fly since they couldn't get far enough lift from hitting the water. She latched onto Toothless as she could see that he had lost consciousness, and if they didn't get to the surface, they would drown. She began to pull Toothless towards where she could see sunlight but was having a hard time moving. She kept pushing herself towards the water surface, but Toothless kept her down. Her vision began to darken as she could no longer hold her breath. She kept her claws on Toothless as her vision faded. Toothless. Underscore 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 underscore. Luna's eyes shot open as she gasped. She was surprised to feel that she was on land. Looking down, she saw that she was on the edge of a beach with the water splashing on half her body. She relaxed as she realized that she was alive and safe. It was then she realized something. Toothless. She got up and began to spin around in order to see if she could spot any sign of him. She then saw a mass of black and immediately rushed to it. She saw that it was indeed Toothless, who was laying on his side, but he wasn't moving. Fearing the worst, she nudged his head with her nose. Toothless. She nudged him a few more times, but he still had not reacted. Toothless. She circled around him, making sure not to step on his tail as she began to breathe heavily. She continued to circle until she was on the side that his stomach was facing. He cooed as she nudged him again. Come on, Toothless. Do something. She used her snout to lift his head off the sand before letting it drop. But much to her dismay, he had not reacted. Her wings drooped as she was coming to the conclusion that he had not survived. Don't leave me where I can't follow. She sat there looking at Toothless' limp body for a second before. Rah. She threw her head back and let out a roar of agony into the air with her wings spread out. After she finished her roar, letting the echo of it spread to all those who could hear to know of her anguish, she sat there looking at the body of her closest and only friend. She didn't know how long she sat there, but when she finally looked at something other than him, she saw that the sun had fallen past the horizon. She felt that she would need to get some sleep and got back up on her paw. She lifted her front paw, ready to find somewhere to sleep, but she couldn't leave. She couldn't leave him there. After a minute of thought, she moved over and began to dig at the sand under him. Once there was enough room, she shimmied her head under his body and lifted him. Come on, Toothless. I'm not leaving you here. She moved away from the sea until she made it into a forest. She tried to find an area that she could use to sleep, but as she did this, she thought about what she was doing. Why am I even doing this? This isn't the first time someone I know died in front of me, yet why am I even bringing him with me? I should have just sent him off to join our brothers and sisters to fly in the everlasting. It was then she had thought of something. But, would he? She shook her head to rid herself of these thoughts. After a bit more searching, she found a clearing that she could use. She gently placed Toothless down on the ground before she moved to a spot and used her plasma to create a hot spot for her to sleep on. She made sure that the grass she burnt would not create a fire of the forest before she patted it and laid down. She curled up and was about to fall asleep, but her eyes caught sight of Toothless. After staring for a second, she groaned at herself. I'm stupid. Luna draped her wing on top of Toothless as she had put him on the hot spot. She laid her head down so she could get some sleep. Her eyes shifted to Toothless' head as it laid next to her. I'm so stupid. She shut her eyes as she let out a shaky breath. Underscore 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 underscore. Luna was startled awake as she heard something. She noticed that it was still dark out, so it meant that she wasn't asleep long. She looked around to see if she could see where it came from. After a few seconds, she couldn't see any movement. She sniffed the air to see if she could find any other dragon's scent or the scent of a human. As she did this, she could only get 2 scents, a small bit of her own scent and Toothless. That's when she paused before taking another sniff. She turned her head towards Toothless and began to sniff him. It smelled like him, but the thing was, it didn't sound like a corpse. A dead dragon would gain a scent that would tell other dragons that it was dead. It doesn't take long for it to become apparent, as the body's internal flame would cause the body to begin to decay fast. The biology of a dragon keeps the internal fire they have subdued as long as they live. Yet when they die, the body's main workings that keep the ability to create flames in check fails, and the ability begins to burn internal organs and create a smell of a slowly burning body. Luna sniffed him again and was sure now. He didn't have the smell of death. Toothless. She didn't receive a response, but the slight hope in her would not let the dreadful idea pop back up. She thought about what she could do to gain a reaction and then came up with an idea. She grew closer, tilted him a bit, and ran her tongue on the underside of his neck. Asterisk croon asterisk. Luna straightened up in shock as she heard Toothless croon from her action. He's alive. She took a few steps back before she hopped around while repeating it. He's alive. He's alive, he's alive, he's alive. She stopped and looked down at Toothless and had her tail wag a bit as she was happy to know her friend was alive. She used her nose to nudge Toothless' head again, but this time more playfully. I should blast you for making me worry. She then moved to lay down again and draped her wing over him. But I'm just glad that you're okay. Underscore 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 tilde morning tilde. Hiccup groaned as he regained consciousness. Why does my body hurt? He took stock of what was sore and could feel his wings and tail were slightly sore. So I'm a dragon again. That must be why my body is sore. Toothless. Luna had heard the groan coming from her left and was immediately awake to see if what happened during the night wasn't a dream. She watched him for a second before she saw his tail move. It was when she heard her groan that she pounced, literally. She jumped at him, causing the two dragons to tumble a bit before she was on top of him with him groaning in pain. Do you have any idea how worried I was? Ow, did you have to jump on me? He groggily opened his eyes to see a sad look in her eyes. What happened? Are you okay? Luna smiled before she gave a quick lick on his snout. We crashed into the ocean and you didn't wake up until now. She got off him and moved to sit to his side. How do you feel? Hiccup at the moment was a little stunned by her action. That lick on his snout caused his mind to freeze. He couldn't understand why, but when she did that, it felt a whole lot more intimate than other times he has been licked. After a second of silence, her question registered in his head and he rolled onto his belly before lifting himself. He felt that what hurt the most was his back, but it wasn't that bad. I'm okay. Just feel like I had a gronkle land on me. Luna chortled at this before she felt her stomach call out for food. You hungry? Hiccup was about to say he wasn't until he let out a roar, but from his stomach rather than his mouth. Thank you for letting us know. That was his snarky reply to his stomach. He then looked at her and deadpanned at her amused look. I think that gave us the answer. Luna laughed at this before she shifted her head for him to follow. Let's go find some food. Hiccup nodded as he followed Luna deeper into the forest. As he followed her, he kept flexing his wings as it now felt tingly instead of sore. You should just let it heal on its own. It shouldn't take long now. He looked up to see that she was looking back at him. He nodded his head as he moved faster to walk by her side. So where are we going? Luna shook her head as she looked where they were heading. I don't know. I haven't been here before, but... She lifted her head to see if she could find something to eat before she caught the scent of an animal. Good. There is something we can eat. Come on. The two dragons went deeper into the forest till they came across a boar that was wandering around. Hiccup sat back as he knew for a fact that he would ruin whatever Luna was going to do. But he did keep an eye on her as she circled around the boar. For a split second, he had lost sight of her, but he then saw her white scales peek out some thick foliage. As he saw her, he saw how her pupils had narrowed. She almost looked menacing. He watched in morbid fascination when she pounced at the boar and dug her teeth into its neck, causing it to squeal in pain and try to get out of her grip. After a few seconds, the pig had squealed its last, and he watched as she let go and her eyes went back to normal. Part of him was scared at the sight of a dragon with blood smeared on its mouth, but the rest of him knew that she was no danger to him. Luna licked her lips of the blood on her before she looked down at the pig and then back to Toothless. Well, come on. Hiccup looked at the carcass before his stomach forced him to move. He let his instincts take over again as he ate some of the pig while leaving some for Luna. As Luna ate her portion of the boar, she thought about what they can do. The island they were on wasn't that grand and she didn't feel like they could just stay here till she could take him back. Despite how she was starting to think that she shouldn't. We can't stay on this island and Toothless is hopeless on his own. She then came up with something that can help them both. Once the two had finished their meal, Luna then looked at Toothless before she felt that something else needed to be done first. Toothless. Hiccup was licking his lips as he had enjoyed eating the boar. Sure, he knows that it was raw, but his dragon body found it delicious. He looked up at Luna before he felt something wet slide up the side of his face. He froze at this, but another passing of it snapped him out of it. Luna. Luna ran her tongue over the side of Toothless's face to remove some remnants of sand that had stuck to it. Hold still, if you move around too much, I won't be able to get the sand off. She continued to clean him as she felt compelled to do so. She knew that this kind of action was something very intimate and is usually done with fellow hatchmates or a parent, but she could not help but find that this time it was more personal. This can also be done by those who are subservient to an alpha or to a mate. She paused her actions for a second before continuing. To her, it didn't matter anymore. By how things are, they are the last of their kind, even if Toothless is human most of the time. And he had no idea how to clean himself anyway, so she took it upon herself to do this. She already accepted what she was doing and the implications of it. Hiccup felt like if he was human right now he would be blushing. So much so that the gods themselves would be able to find him. Her licking felt both odd and pleasurable. He found himself purring at her actions as he ended up laying down with her, not stopping. He closed his eyes as her tongue slid on the underside of his neck. It was once it hit a certain spot that he felt euphoria and collapsed completely on the ground. He let out a happy croon as he laid there. Luna smiled at the limp form of Toothless as she knew what she hit. It was a pleasure spot for their kind and he was now suffering the effects. She turned her body as she laid down next to him and shifted her head so that they were pressed against each other. What was that? Luna smiled as she answered, just something that I wanted to do. The two of them laid there for a while as neither of them felt like moving. Underscore 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 tilde later tilde. The sun was beginning to drop into the horizon, giving the sky an orange glow. Both of them had gotten up and Luna led them to a location that they needed to be at for what she planned on doing. No. Yes. I won't. You will. You can't make me. Oh really? Why do I have to? Toothless, if you don't, we will be stuck here. And I'm not going to leave you on your own while I go out and get some fish. The two of the dragons were at the edge of a large cliff with Hiccup staring down at the crashing waves down below. Hiccup looked behind him to Luna, who was looking at him somewhat impatiently. He turned back to down below. He gulped as he mumbled, "And I brought you fish when we were at the cove." Luna rolled her eyes as she moved closer. "Toothless, all I'm asking you is to use this as a starting point so you can learn how to fly on your own." She now stood next to him. "I'm not asking you to face off against a spike screamer. Whispering Death." Hiccup paused in his worry as he tried to remember what a spike screamer was. "Oh, you mean a Whispering Death? Sure, I would love to face off with that just as much as I would like to jump off to the waters below and drown," was his snooky response as he gave her a look. Luna sighed as she shook her head. "You're thinking about it too much. Don't think about it. All you need to do is let your instincts guide you. Once you do, you will be able to learn how to fly on your own." She then looked down to the side. "And besides, if you do fall, there is some land right there for you to swim to." At the bottom of the cliff, only a few dozen feet away, was the beach that Luna had woken up on. Luna knew that if Toothless wasn't able to do it, that he would be able to shrug off the impact with the water since, compared to how far they fell before, it wasn't that high. "Look, just trust me on this." I trust, it's me that I'm not so sure about." He thought back to many of his inventions that he had made, with most of them not working properly. "Hatchlings know how to do it when they come out of their eggs," she said in a teasing tone. Hiccup groaned as he gave her a deadpan look. "Yeah, well, I wasn't born from an egg." She could see the self-doubt he had as she remembered how he had lived his life before. She didn't like that look in his eyes, human or dragon, and she needed to get rid of it. She then thought about something she had seen done before. "Hiccup, you need to stop thinking so hard." She slowly took a few steps back until she was behind him. Hiccup shook his head as he just couldn't think of himself flying in the air. "I just don't know how I would be able to just spontaneously learn how to get myself in the air. I mean, I remember flying on your back, but for me to fly on my own, I don't think I can." Luna gave an amused smile as she readied herself. That's just it. Stop thinking and let it come naturally, and with that, she threw her body weight into a shove and sent Toothless falling off the cliffside. Hiccup screeched out as he found himself rapidly falling towards the water. She pushed me. She pushed me off the cliff. His mind was racing as he tried to comprehend the fact that he was falling. What do I do? How do I stop? He saw that he was halfway down and he didn't know what to do. Stop thinking and let it come naturally. Sure, it sounded somewhat easy, but he had no idea how. Seeing the water coming closer, he shut his eyes in his panic. Without even realizing it, he spread his wings and straightened his fins and tail. Due to his eyes being shut, he didn't even notice that he had pulled himself up just short of hitting the water and was gliding. He had expected some sort of pain to run through his body after hitting the water, but instead of pain, he felt the wind blowing on his face. He slowly opened his, and instead of seeing bubbles and feeling wet, he felt free. He fully opened his eyes to see that he was gliding just over the water. He looked down to see the water speed past him, and his look of shock quickly became a smile. Ha 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 ha. I did it. Yes, you did. Hiccup turned his head to see Luna flying next to him, but higher. But now you have to control it. Hiccup shifted his gaze to his wings and thought about what she said. Control it. He thought about it for a second, and to him, it didn't sound right. No, not control it, just fly. He chose to no longer think about it, and with a mighty flap of his wings, he shot upward. Luna watched as Toothless began to gain altitude fast, and she gave chase after him. She caught up with him, and the two were now high in the air, flying at great speeds. Hiccup looked at her with the biggest smile he has ever had in his life. This is amazing, Tilda. Luna smiled back before she gained a cocky look. Now let's see how good you really are. She then dived down, towards an archipelago that they had come upon. Underscore 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 underscore. Tilda. Play moments like this by the artist Tilda. Hiccup dived after her as he began to chase her. Luna swerved left and right to give Toothless a challenge in their flying. Looking back, she saw that he was keeping up with her, and she chortled at this before she looked ahead. She saw several rock spires and narrowed her eyes as she made her way to them. Hiccup saw where she was going and smirked as he followed her. Left. Right. Through. And under. The two dragons maneuvered through the maze of rock with outstanding skill. Luna kept looking back to make sure he was still on her, and she was pleasantly surprised that he seemed to be a natural at doing this without an outside influence. Like he had always known how to fly. Hiccup narrowed his eyes as he was closing in on Luna. At first, he was mainly following her exactly, but now he felt the need to follow his own path. So he broke off and began to fly on his own. He continued to maneuver through with ease until he saw a narrow path cut in one of the spires. In a split decision, he turned his body and flew harmlessly through. He then saw Luna far to his right and felt a bit mischievous and lowered himself to be at a lower altitude. Luna looked behind her to see if Toothless was still behind her, but she was surprised to see that he wasn't there. She made it past the spires and stopped her forward momentum and spun around and turned her head left and right to see if she could see any sign of him. Toothless. She got her answer when he flew up right in front of her. Ha 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 ha. Tilda. She looked up before she followed him, easily catching up to him as they both began to fly in symmetry. Tilda. Transition music into romantic flight from the How to Train Your Dragon soundtrack. Tilda. The two of them began to fly in a double helix pattern as they rose. They broke through the clouds as they stopped their ascent and just hovered where they were. The moonlight lit them both in its light and they just gazed at each other. Luna was happy to see Toothless up here with her and beyond the control of the Queen. This is how it should be. Hiccup was breathing heavily, but he felt he had the energy to spare. He looked at Luna and gazed into her eyes as they reflected the moon. Her name never felt more appropriate, as if she was the dragon goddess of the moon herself. This is how I want it to be. On instinct he gave her snout a quick lick as he slowed his flapping and began to descend with her doing the same. Tilda. Transition music to Audio Machine, Beyond the Clouds. Tilda. The two dragons then began to glide just above the clouds, side by side with the tip of their wings touching. Hiccup looked to Luna as he smiled so wide that his tongue began to flap around. Luna smiled at him as she chortled at how silly he was being at the moment. The two dragons flowed with the clouds while remaining close to each other. They flowed over a clump of clouds before they lower through the clouds and now flew under the clouds. Hiccup felt the moisture of the cloud on his scales and it felt so refreshing. Toothless. Hiccup looked to Luna as she looked at him. Thank you for being here. Hiccup was a little confused with what she meant, but he felt that there was a deeper meaning to it. He smiled back at her as he said, and thanks for being here with me. The two continued to fly through the sky with nothing but the clouds as their companions. Underscore 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 tilde later tilde. Hiccup and Luna had landed on a larger island, about the size of Berk if not bigger. Luna was leading them through the forest as she said that there was a spot that they could get some sleep. She actually blamed Toothless for the change in her sleep schedule, but it is what it is. She took a whiff of the air before she turned a bit and began to head uphill. We're almost there. Keep up, Toothless. Hiccup was close by, but his wings were tired as he had pushed himself as fast as he could go after they began to search for somewhere to sleep. Not to mention that his landing was the worst one a dragon walked away from in dragon history. I am keeping up, he huffed as he bounded closer to her. It's my tail that's lagging behind. Luna rolled her eyes as they were coming up to the top of the hill. She hoped further ahead and looked down at the bottom of the hill at a small area that had different levels of ground. We're here. Hiccup came up to stand to Luna's left and looked down to see that it was a nesting area with a horde of dragons. Instead of the usual Viking reaction of fear or excitement, he was in awe at what he was seeing. There was a pack of deadly nadders grooming one another and nipping at each other as if to mess with the one they were with. Hold still and stop fidgeting. You still have a few spots that need cleaning. Gronkles laying in a pile with the one on top laying on his back and kicking his hind leg. MMMM fish MMMMRRMMM. A horde of terrible terrors crawling all over a grumpy-looking monstrous nightmare. Said nightmare went cross-eyed as a terror was on his head and looked at him upside down. He narrowed his eyes before grumbling out, "Get off me." But what got Hiccup the most was that there were several families down there. Baby Gronkles, nadders, and a few nightmares. Their parents making sure that the young were comfortable. He sat there looking at the scene and could not help but smile at what his people thought were monsters. They were never monsters, they were like any other living being. Everything we know about you guys is wrong. Luna smiled at what he said as she knew the implication to it. She leaned in and nuzzled him under his neck as she cooed. Everything they know about us is wrong. Hiccup heard what she said and this confused him. Not on the meaning but what he thought about the meaning. Is it like that? Luna stopped her nuzzling and moved forward while she curved her body to continue to rub under his neck till she gave her tail a light flick at his nose as she moved forward. Come on. Let's find a spot so we can sleep. Hiccup had a droopy-eyed look as her gesture was pleasant to him. He shook his head before he looked at her and nodded before slowly following her. Maybe. Underscore 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 underscore. End of chapter. The end.